Okay, next topic up. The reason that there's so much economic insecurity, so many people are freaked out, so many people are making decisions out of, fear is because there's no money. There are no jobs. Small businesses all over the country have been closed. Large businesses all over the country have laid off tons of employees. Government workers and contractors are getting furloughed. And of course, we've passed one one piece of legislation that offered some financial relief to the vast majority of Americans. One. One. And that was back in the spring. We're now moving towards Halloween. So this beckons the question, if we're the greatest country on earth and we're such a capitalistic powerhouse and we have so much money at our disposal, why aren't people getting money? Is it because we don't have money? No, of course not. We have tons of money. The money printer goes brrr all the time. We have more money than we know what to do with, which is why the vast majority of banks that have money are just sitting on money. They're not spending it. They're not loaning it. What little they are spending is apparently not being spent on you or myself or any other member of the working class. Apparently, this is where our money's going. Pentagon used taxpayer money meant for masks and swabs to make jet engine parts and body armor. Because, of course, they did. That's how we roll in America. Yeah! Hold on, I got a button for this one. Dur, 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 dur. Does it seem familiar? No. Crushing it, America. Woo! So I wonder how much money the Pentagon stole this time. Let's find out. A $1 billion fund Congress gave the Pentagon in March to build up the country's supply of medical equipment has instead been mostly funneled to defense contractors and used to make things such as jet engine parts, body armor, and dress uniforms. The change illustrates how one taxpayer-backed effort to battle the novel coronavirus, which has killed more than 200,000 Americans, was instead diverted towards patching up long-standing perceived gaps in military supplies. That's right, money that was allocated to the Pentagon to make life-saving and safety equipment for first-line responders was instead funneled to military contractors for more body armor. I wish I could say I was surprised, but I've been living in the United States of America for 4 decades now and I watch the news. So, no, really not surprising at all. The CARES Act, which Congress passed earlier this year, gave the Pentagon, quote, money to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. But a few weeks later, the Defense Department began reshaping how it would award the money in a way that represented a major departure from Congress's intent. The payments were made, even though the U.S. health officials think major funding gaps in pandemic response still remains. Robert Redfield, director for the CDC, said in Senate testimony last week that states desperately need $6 billion to distribute vaccines to Americans early next year. Many U.S. hospitals still face a severe shortage of N95 masks. These are the types of problems that the money was originally intended to address. This is part and parcel of whether we have budget priorities that actually serve our public safety, or whether we have a government that is captured by special interests. Well, let's see. The Pentagon was supposed to spend $1 billion on masks and tests, and they spent it on buying shit from military contractors. So I'm going to go with, yes, our government has been captured by special interests. Call me kooky, but kind of looks that way. DoD officials contend they have sought to strike a balance between boosting American medical production and supporting the defense industry, whose health they consider critical to national security. Because, if Boeing goes under or Boeing has a bad quarter and Boeing's stock price drops, well, then America's military security is obviously at risk because a corporation that has stocks that are publicly traded is somehow economically vulnerable, and somehow that's part of our national defense strategy. So now you can explain to me why anybody can buy their shares publicly. because you can't really tell me that Boeing has to be kept healthy because of American security, and yet anybody on the face of the planet can buy shares of Boeing and eventually could even own enough shares to take over active control of Boeing. But apparently Boeing's financial health is more important than your actual physical health. Good to know. The Pentagon, which as of 2016 employed more than 156,000 people working in acquisitions alone, also has lent its expertise to the Department of Health and Human Services as it seeks to purchase billions of dollars in needed medical equipment. Of course, they don't have money because the Pentagon already spent it. Real quick, the Pentagon, as of 4 years ago, employed 156,000 people in acquisitions alone. Now, as a comparison, CVS, the nation's largest pharmacy chain, one of the nation's largest pharmacy chains, employs roughly 200,000 people. Pizza Hut employs 125,000. So less than the DoD employs just in acquisitions, because that's how many lobbyists defense contractors have, that it takes 156,000 government employees to have lunch and write down their bribe requests over the course of a year. That's how much fuckery there is going on. We're thankful that Congress provided authorities and resources that enabled the executive branch to invest in domestic production of critical medical resources and protect key defense capabilities from the consequences of COVID. Pentagon Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment said in his statement, "We need to always remember that the economic security and national security are very tightly interrelated, and our industrial base is really the nexus of the two." I'm sorry, are you saying that the government and capitalism are inexorably linked together? What? Shut the front door. Wow, it only took 1,500 years for shit-eating capitalists to admit that one. Thanks. Woo! Glad we finally got that one on public record. The $1 billion fund is just a fraction of the $3 trillion in emergency spending that Congress approved earlier this year to deal with the pandemic. But it shows how the blizzard of bailout cash was, in some cases, redirected to firms that weren't originally targeted for assistance. It also shows how difficult it's been for officials to track down how the money is spent, and in the case of Congress, intervene when changes are made. The Trump administration has done little to limit the defense firms from accessing multiple bailout funds at once, and is not requiring companies to refrain from layoffs as a condition of receiving the awards, because they exist outside the law, because they have more than enough money to purchase more than enough influence to get whatever they want from government. And their threat is, well, if you don't buy enough bombs from us to keep our stock prices high enough, well, then I guess we'll be forced to sell these bombs to China, or we'll be forced to sell these bombs to Iran, or we'll be forced to sell these bombs to Saudi Arabia. And magically, the U.S. government just gets money. It just goes sprinkle, 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 and it just rains down as the money printer goes brrrr. And just like that, Boeing gets another $1 billion. Lieutenant Dan, they're not going to buy you new legs, but they're going to buy bombs. Dang it. Woo! Some defense contractors received the Pentagon money even though they had already dipped into another pot of bailout funding, the PPP. Congress, at Trump's urging, is debating whether to pass another massive stimulus package, and the Pentagon and defense contractors have already called for an additional $11 billion to be directed towards their programs. Yes, because they wanted $12 billion and they were only able to steal $1 billion, so they're still going to require another $11 billion of my money and your money and the money that was paid in taxes by all the small businesses that have now been shut down. But God forbid our military budget drops below whatever it is, $770 billion a year. God forbid we don't spend as much on military as the next 12 largest countries combined. God forbid we don't keep funding defense contractors at the expense of schools or public health. Oh no, then capitalism's just going to go into a tailspin. And we can't have that because, as the DoD admitted, capitalism and the government are inexorably linked together. They're bosom buddies. Synergy. The $1 billion fund was allocated under the Defense Production Act, which allows Trump to compel U.S. companies to manufacture products in the nation's interest. Trump's described the law as a tremendous hammer and boasted in August that he has used the DPA more comprehensively than any president in history. It's been tremendous. The tremendous amount of things I bought with it. It's amazing. His administration was under intense pressure this spring to use the law to address dire shortages in medical-grade masks and other supplies. But in the months after the package was passed, the Pentagon changed how the money would be used. It decided to give defense contractors hundreds of millions of dollars from the fund, mostly for projects that have little to do with corona response. Defense Department lawyers quickly determined that the money could be used for defense program, a conclusion that Congress later disputed. The DoD went to the lawyers and went, "Do you think there's any possible way we could do this?" And they're like, "Well, it's possible." And the Pentagon was like, "Cool, close enough. We'll take the billion." Like, oh, this fucking country. Among the awards, $183 million to firms, including Rolls-Royce, to maintain shipbuilding industries, tens of millions of dollars for satellite, drone, and space surveillance technology, $80 million to a Kansas aircraft parts business, who's suffering because the Boeing 737 MAX got grounded. You know, the plane that kept splitting apart, so they had to stop selling them. Yeah, somehow we're bailing those people out too. Well played. And $2 million for a domestic manufacturer of army dress uniform fabric. Gee, I wonder if they went out and bought a whole bunch of material in a nice government brown. You know, or at least the shirts. Maybe just brown shirts. Maybe that's what they bought. So, ladies and gentlemen, don't fret when the government tells you that they can't afford to give you another bailout or stimulus package or mortgage or rent or loan forgiveness. They don't actually mean it. They can afford it. They would just rather give your money to military defense contractors and then not give a fuck. Have a blessed day, everybody.